Welcome to Tabernacle Baptist Church for our Sunday school time. We've told you to ask you to turn to Judges chapter 16. It has been an interesting look so far at Samson, and we see the mercy of God in the things that we're seeing. God has set him aside to have a ministry as a Nazarite to deliver the people from the Philistines. And yet Samson has not had the attitude of a servant. He has actually had the attitude of someone who is pretty much taken over by pride and self-worth and self-will. And we even find here as he does the wrong decision of deciding to marry a Philistine woman. And all that brought about, he got his feelings hurt because friends made her tell them about the riddle that he had given to them concerning the lion and the honey that he had encountered in time before. And as they came back and told him about that, now by the way, don't you think this is a good indication that gambling's no good, right? And that's what he was doing. He was gambling, and of course he got his feelings hurt because of gambling. And I know if you're going to gamble, I know you're going to get your feelings hurt. And also you'd be worried about what you got, wouldn't you? Well, he was not concentrating on the things of God. He was concentrating on the things that he wanted. And instead of getting what he wanted, he had to end up, even though they cheated to get it, and he made that known. But at the end, he went home and pouted, left his wife behind because she told the fellas something that she wasn't supposed to tell them. She was given to another man. And when he comes back and brings a kid to give her, the father says, "No, I'm sorry, you can't have her. You left. I didn't know where you were, so I just gave her away to somebody else." You say, "Preacher, this is worse than a lot of soap operas, the way all this kind of falls into place." But we're talking about the Philistines who had no moral compass because they didn't serve the true and living God. And we're dealing with someone like Samson, who is keeping the vows as far as what he is dealing with not cutting his hair. As a Nazarite vow is not supposed to be touching things that are dead. He's already fallen short of that. And we'll find that even here, we've gone through this in the first middle of chapter 15, where he deals with battle here. But we see that as Samson comes back and he finds that his wife has been given away, he gets so upset. And I think verse number 3 doesn't give as much of an indication of his ministry as much as an indication of his misery and living for himself. In verse number 3, "And Samson said concerning them, Now shall I be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them a displeasure." Well, he got 300 foxes, tied their tails together, and then put brands between their tails and lit it on fire, and they went through the crops of the Philistines, destroyed the crops. And then here they came back, wanted to know what was going on, and when they found out Samson had done it, they killed his wife and everybody that was in the house. All right, verse number 7, "And Samson said unto them, Though ye have done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and after that I will cease." Well, we'll find out that God has other plans there. And, it's good to say, "Lord willing," when we do something like that. But as he smote them with a great slaughter, and the Philistines went up, and they were going to get him and his friends, and it says 3,000 men of Judah came out and said, "What are you doing? You're you're putting our lives in danger because," and you can see that maybe they're saying, "You're just doing what you want to do. You're not thinking about the will of the Lord. And God is using this." We find the hand of the Lord over all this. But as we see here, he says, well, if you don't hurt me, if you don't slay me, if you'll tie me up and give me to them, then that's all I want you to do. You give them to me, you go ahead and do that. That'll make you feel better. That'll put me in a good position if that's what happened. And when he gets there, of course, he breaks the bonds that he has, just snaps them, and he finds a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand and took it, slew 1,000 men therewith. Now again, touching a carcass of a dead animal. We're talking about the mercy of God here. He did do the work of God, and I would think that here, as he goes back and God clave the hollow place in the jaw, and there came water thereout, and when he had drunk, the Spirit came again, and he revived therefore. Now, an interesting thought here, that God brings restoration out of death. God brings restoration out of death. And he was fulfilling the ministry that he had been called to do in delivering the Philistines. By the time we get to chapter 16, we find here in verse number 1, again, this is still problematic. It says, then went Samson to Gaza, saw there a harlot, and went in unto her. Well, that's not a good thing either. We saw last week that this is something this is something that was against the Word of God. God had given this plainly in the writings of Moses, and here they are. He is just living a life of carefree, and I'm sure as we get through this chapter, I'm sure you're going to see him get to the place where his pride overtakes the ministry he's been given. His pride becomes so great he doesn't think he needs God. Now you can tell that already for the fact that he's having problems with so many areas in his life. And you talk about the mercy of God, yes. Are you talking about the work of God even though someone's not living right? Yes. God can use someone, but I'm pretty sure, and I'm not the judge, so I'm just going to give you my thoughts. I'm pretty sure that Samson, in what he has done so far, will not be rewarded for his service to God, because that was the wood, hay, and stubble of 1 Corinthians chapter number 3. He was doing that because he got his feelings hurt. He did that because he was angry. He didn't do that because of the love of the Lord. He didn't do that because God had called him to this ministry. And we see here in chapter 16 that this continues. And as they lie in wait for him, they find out that he's there. The Philistines lie in wait, and they're going to get him at the dawn of the day. But Samson gets up at midnight, goes out to the front gate, just lifts it off its post, bar and all. Now, I assume the bar was the bar that held the two doors together. So we're talking about him carrying this out and setting it on the hill above the town of Gaza, carrying it on his shoulders, setting it down, and walking home. And then we get to verse number 4. And it came to pass that afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Oh my! Now we know the story of Samson and Delilah. We're going to find out that Delilah is going to be a minister for his enemy, and Samson knows this. I don't think Samson's dumb. I think Samson's intelligent. I think he knows what's going on after we get to verse number 7. Let me read verse number 6. After they had gotten a hold of Delilah and said, okay, we'll give you 1,100 pieces of silver from every one of us if you will just do what we find out where his strength lies so that we can overtake him. So here we find at the very outset, he falls in love with her. She's working for the enemy, and he doesn't have the spiritual inclination to say something like, Lord, what do you want me to do? Because you know what the Lord's going to say. And Samson is going to have a relationship with this woman. Verse number 6, and Delilah said to Samson, tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, and wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. And Samson said unto her, If ye bind me with 7 green withs that were never dried, then shall I be weak as another man. And the lords of the Philistines brought up her 7 green withs, which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. And there were men lying in wait, abiding with her in the chamber. Now look here, they weren't outside of town waiting to come in. They were in the chamber. They were there to attack him. I just can't imagine that Samson would be this, but listen to this. And she said unto him, The Philistines are upon thee, Samson. And he brake the withs as the thread of tow is broken when it toucheth the fire, so his strength was not known. In other words, they didn't know where his strength came from because this didn't take his strength away. Okay, the Philistines were there. He was tied with the 7 green withs. He was playing with her because he said, I can get away with this. I can do what I want and it won't bother me. I can have my way. A dangerous situation. We'll see this. Will Samson continue to be used? Yes, but at what cost? Number 2, we find verse number 10. And Delilah said unto Samson, Behold, thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thou mightest be bound. This is the second thing. And he said unto her, If they bind me fast with new ropes that never were occupied, then shall I be weak and be as another man. And Delilah therefore took new ropes and bound him. Now, you think he's going to sleep during that? You think he'd have to be playing possum through all that? You know, we talk about playing possum, playing dead. He's playing to be asleep. Asleep in the green withs and now the new ropes. Something's up. And the men are in the chamber. And that doesn't bother him. You know, we get to the place a lot of times where we're comfortable with sin being around and said, oh, that won't bother us. We'll be able to handle it. And of course, as it says here, verse number 12, Delilah therefore took new ropes and bound him therewith and said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And there were liars and wait, abiding in the chamber, and he brake them from off his arms like a thread. Verse number 13, Delilah said unto him, Samson, whitherto thou hast mocked me, or hitherto hath thou mocked me, and told me lies. Tell me wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, If thou weavest the 7 locks of my head with a web. Now, wait a minute. Now he's getting close to dealing with the Nazarite vow. There's nothing said about how he wears this hair, so weaving his hair would not be a problem. But now he's dealing with the effect of the Nazarite vow. God had used him. This was an outward indication that he was a Nazarite. This is what he wore all day long. This is what he had all night long. At all times, that hair was a reminder of the Nazarite vow. The power came from God, but it was in his obedience to the Nazarite vow, and now he's getting close to saying to her where his strength lies by saying, well, if you'll just braid my hair and put it in a web, it'll be something that'll cause me to be weak. And she fastened it with a pin and said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he waked out of his sleep and went away with the pin of the beam and with the web. And she said unto him, How canst thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lieth. Now, I would think that if Samson had any type of spiritual thought, he'd be thinking, this is not the girl for me. This is not an accident there in the chamber. And that everything I tell her, she does, and these men are jumping out. That should have been a real indication I don't need to be here. But I want you to see in verse number 16. It's always sometimes a dangerous thing when it comes to pass. But here it says, and it came to pass when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death. You know, he would have done better if he pouted like he did when his wife had given out the answer to the riddle and just gone home. He vexed her to death. Good sign, you don't need to be there, right? God, the joy of the Lord is strength. And here he was being vexed to death, and of course not living as he ought to be living. Verse number 17, and he told her all his heart. You know, the Bible says something about not casting your pearl before swine. The things of God are not honored and not loved by the world. And you ever talk to a lost person about answer prayer? Here you are joyful about what God's done. They're going to make fun of you. Oh, it's just a coincidence. Your God didn't do that. You ever heard something like that? You see, when we take those things that are so precious to us and we put them before a lost world, don't be surprised if they want to tear it up. Don't be surprised if they want to throw mud on it. You cast your pearl before swine, you're going to have something that's going to be food for the swine that's going to be in the mud too. Because the pigs will eat anything. It came to pass when she pressed him daily with her words. Now he's about ready to deal with the essence of the ministry he has had all of his life. He has not known anything but the Nazarite vow. Before he was even conceived, his mother took part in the Nazarite vow, so that by the time he came along, he actually had a head start to keeping the Nazarite vow. And now, after all these years, and here he is, he told her all his heart and said unto her, there hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I've been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb, and if I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. Now, okay, he has told her about his Nazarite vow. He has told her about the key part of that Nazarite vow, about not letting a razor touch his hair. And yet, he's still going to stay there, knowing what she's done the 3 other times. He might not have been stupid, but he sure wasn't very smart, was he? I mean, you could call him foolish. But isn't that what playing around with worldly things does? It makes us foolish. We miss seeing the spiritual things because we're playing around with the things of the world. We miss the blessings of God. And of course, we'll find out here that Samson is going to miss the blessings of God. Let's read on just a little bit. And when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up this once, for he hath showed me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came up unto her and brought money in their hand, and she made him sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head. And she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. She began to afflict him. She had someone come in. Why? Was he drugged? I don't know. But I know that if he hadn't been, I know this, if he hadn't been there, he wouldn't have gotten to the problem he got into. I think it's good that he might have shared that he was a Nazarite and that strength was from God. And the hair was a sign of the Nazarite vow. But for him, knowing what she had done in time past, to allow her to be able to do this to him, I don't know. If he had 7 locks, I don't know how he could have stayed asleep during that time. You think his pride had gotten to the place where he thought, it doesn't matter. God will give me strength even if I don't have these locks. Maybe he thought that God owed him because God had called him into this ministry. And look what he'd gotten away with in the past. And he says, well, I can do this too. And maybe he was thinking, this hair is probably not that important anyway. But when they cut his 7 locks off, she began to afflict him. His strength was gone. And she said in verse number 20, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awoke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as at other time. Now, he knew he'd have that haircut. You knew that, right? Hadn't had a haircut all his life. Now doesn't have a hair on his head. You knew, he knew. I will go out as at other times before and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. Well, my goodness. Look at the way he's been living his life so far. Everything we've known about Samson has been for self. And when pride got so full that he says, I don't need this hair, and I can play around with Delilah, and I will do just exactly what I've done before and shake myself. And I don't know how he did that. But maybe that was a way of kindling that strength. I don't know. But he said, I'll just do what I've done before and everything will be all right. But God wasn't with him because he had disobeyed what God had said. Here we come to the end of mercy. Now you might say, in the long run, God was still merciful. He allowed him to live. Oh, but what a cost he had to pay. But the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. Now, he had his life, but no pleasures, no will of his own, no sight, and no strength. It's a dangerous thing, isn't it? When we don't follow after God. When we do those things that are not pleasing to him. Let me read on just a little bit. Verse number 22, howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. Then the Lord of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their God, and to rejoice, for they said, our God hath delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand. This is the problem that we have in our nation and our world today, where Christians are disobedient to God, receive the chastening of the Lord, and the world rejoices in the fact that they've fallen, saying, see, their God's not that strong. The Philistines, because of Samson, this wasn't because of God. This was because of Samson. Samson had made these decisions of selfishness and arrogance and pride. Samson had done that. But they had met there to talk about how Samson had been delivered into their hands by their god Dagon. No, Samson had been delivered into their hand because of his gross disobedience to God. Because God in his chastening said, this is it. And because Samson had said, I can do what I want to and there's no penalty that I'll have to pay. But he lost his eyesight. He was nothing now more than a slave. How long do you think it took Samson's hair to grow so that it could be acknowledged as being part of that Nazarite vow. Now, as a slave, nobody would trim up his hair. Nobody wanted to do it. He was a blind man now. And as he's gaining his hair back, there's a lot of time for him to grind at the stone with the fetters of brass and think about what he had done against the Lord. And how they blasphemed the name of Samson's God because of Samson's disobedience. If idolatry and false gods gain power in this world, you think the main reason is Christians are not what they ought to be for the Lord? We're going to stop there. One thing we can still say, God is still a God of mercy. God still had something for Samson to do. Now, I don't know what you got going on in your life, but if it's not what it ought to be, you know, you're dealing with God's mercy.